Winter has left the garden in a bit of a mess, and after a few months of neglect, it has reached the point where it needs a proper reset. It's still February, but this is usually when the prepping season begins. We've been planning this change for a while now, so today we're going to do a much needed spring cleanup along with starting a mulching project. The decorative shrubs and flowering plants need some weed cleaning around them, just so they can stand out again. Right now, new bulb sprouts are getting lost between the grass and weeds, and it's hard to tell which is which. We also need a few extra stones for the border, so part of the pack is already on that, even in the rain. This is the current state of the garden. It looks a bit rough, but we'll start with our main goal for today, clearing this area and getting it ready for mulching. All relevant gardening starts with a bucket. I'll grab my gloves and tools while the girls inspect the area one last time. The first step is clearing the weeds from the strip between the stone border and the fence. We'll work in 3 sections bit by bit, since each area has different things we need to watch out for, mostly the plants we want to keep. This section is the most straightforward. It seems to be the easiest. We're only keeping the larger trees and shrubs, the large lilac tree on the left and the cotoneaster and young apple tree on the right. I'll start with the grassy patch. This one is a bit trickier than the moss-covered side, and you'll see why in a second. The grass doesn't come out cleanly, the roots go deeper and are much more anchored compared to the moss. I'll save the moss clumps for later because we want to try and move the moss under the bench once that area is cleared as well. The moss covering comes off much easier. It's actually quite satisfying to peel it off of the ground like this. This area looks clean enough now, so I'll bring the hose and water it down to prepare it for the next step, which is laying the cardboard. If the soil is wet, the cardboard sits better and settles into place more easily. Moving on under the bench, and I see there's another inspection underway. Apart from the dogs, this spot has been taken over by a hardy perennial called Greater Celandine, which is already putting out new stems in early February. And while it does produce a lot of small yellow flowers that are quite charming, this plant also grows up to 80 centimeters, or about 2.7 feet, and bleeds a yellow-orangey sap when damaged. The sap stains absolutely everything: clothes, skin, tools, even dogs, so we've decided to remove it from under the bench where we usually sit. Although now, I'm thinking it could be interesting to test it as a natural pigment or dye. But I'm confident a few of these will re-emerge, so that's something to try another time. Greater Celandine is considered invasive in North America, but it spreads very easily here as well, even though it's a native. The flowers form seed pods that look a bit like green beans, and once those form, it's too late to control it for the season. The best way to control this plant is to simply pull it out from the root, which is what I'm trying to do here. Not always easy. I'm also clearing around the base of the quince tree, the one that produces a huge amount of fruit every year. Preserving them is a bit of a challenge since we don't have a proper cold storage space, so we have to get creative. Anyway, if you don't know the quince overload story, you can check out the video linked in the description. There are a lot of fallen leaves here that we left in place over winter to provide some insulation and shelter for the insects. However, unlike most leaves that break down over time, quince leaves just don't seem to rot over full winter. Even with snow and plenty of moisture, they're still mostly intact. With this last one finally out, I can move on to raking the soil to loosen it up. The goal is to make it a bit more airy, since I'll be placing the moss here, and I feel like this kind of texture should help it settle in, although I'm not completely sure. We'll see how it goes. I'm also picking out some of the pebbles that have shifted from the flower bed nearby. A bit of smoothing, and the moss patches can go in. Transplanting moss is supposed to be fairly simple, or at least that's how the internet makes it look, and I hope that by doing this early in the year, it'll give it a better chance to adapt to the spot. At this point, I realized I forgot to water the soil first, so I'll need to water it properly after everything is in place. I don't want to move the moss again now, since it might affect how it settles. While I usually encourage people to go touch grass in the nicest way possible, I think I'm going to start recommending touching moss as well. I found this activity most therapeutic, and now I kind of understand the huge hype and subculture around this particular sensory experience. And this is how it turned out. Not exactly a full moss carpet, but it's a start. Moving on to some tree pruning. Last year, the lilac put out a lot of suckers that we ignored. But cutting them back helps the tree focus its energy on blooming and also keeps it from turning into a dense shrub at the base. We're also planning to plant flowers in this area, so we need to clear some space. Another tree that desperately needs some attention is the Japanese willow. We planted it 2 years ago and it was basically just a stick with 3 branches, and Kira immediately thought it was a chew toy. Since then, it's grown to about 5 times its original size and takes up quite a bit of space when it's fully leafed out. But it's a willow, and like any willow, it can handle heavy pruning without any issues. It should bounce back fairly quickly. Willows also propagate very easily. Even small cuttings start rooting if they're left in contact with moist soil, so we need to clear these away. This red maple has now gone through 2 winters outside. Last year's late frosts damaged some of the thicker branches. We left them in place for a while, hoping they might recover, but it's clear now that they won't. Back to the sections we cleared earlier, and now it's time for the cardboard. But this part is a bit tricky because there are lots of small spring bulbs just starting to emerge. There are daffodils, tulips, and a few crocuses barely out of the ground, and we want to keep all of them, so we need to work around them carefully. I'll start by cleaning this area and removing the grass we don't want anymore. The lily turf has spread quite a bit and formed dense clusters, so I'll move some of it around and give it more space. I'm also loosening up the top layer of soil and breaking up any clumps that would make it harder to lay the cardboard flat. At the same time, I'm trying to keep track of where new growth is coming up, even if it's not very visible yet. With the first 2 sections prepared, we can start laying the cardboard around the plants. This layer acts as an eco-friendly weed barrier, at least for this season. It blocks light and stops new weeds from growing, which also means fewer seeds for next year. The idea is to reduce unwanted growth so it's easier to see and manage the plants we actually want here. Unlike landscape fabric, cardboard is biodegradable, so it will break down over time. It also helps retain moisture and creates a good environment for earthworms, which in turn improve the soil structure, especially useful here since the soil is quite compact and clay heavy. A bit of water helps soften the cardboard and makes it easier to shape around the ground. We're having a bit of trouble with that stone border. We don't have many large stones, and those are the ones that both look better and are easier to step on compared to the smaller ones. So whenever they shift out of place, it turns into a bit of a puzzle to fit them back together properly. With the cardboard already in place in the trickier area where most of the small shoots are coming up, we get to test planting through it for the first time. Cutting through the cardboard seems easy enough, so this works well as a first test for the mulching setup. I have a pot of white daffodils that have already started growing, so they need to go into the ground. I'm trying to keep the soil from spreading over the cardboard too much, not because it would cause damage, but because a layer of soil on top would allow weeds to grow, which defeats the purpose of using it in the first place. This lily turf came from the discount section of the store. It was just a small tired clump of grass, but it has spread quite well since then, and looks like it's developing nicely. Although apparently it's supposed to grow some purplish flowers on long stems, but has yet to do so. Maybe this year. With the first two sections finally covered and watered, we can finally move on to the part we've been working towards the whole day. The mulch. Out of the many options available on the local market, we wanted something with larger pieces, so we went with pine bark, which was the largest mulch we could find. Because the pieces are bigger, it should, at least in theory, last longer than finer shredded material. Pine bark also breaks down more slowly, which means less frequent replacement over time, and that reduces the long-term cost of maintaining a mulch patch in your garden. Another plus for us was the color, which works well with the rest of the garden, and it gives enough contrast to make the new growth stand out. Our first two sections are done, and we've still got one bit to go. But while we are admiring the way this is changing the look of the garden, there's still some cleaning up to be done in the raised beds. We built these two beds a couple of years ago using standard planks from the hardware store. The darker color comes from burning the wood with a propane torch. Burning creates a charred surface that helps protect the wood from moisture and slows down decay, making these beds, hopefully, last a few years longer. This is an older technique used in many traditional settings and perfected by the Japanese, but locally it was used on fence posts meant to be fixed directly into the ground. Anyway, back to clearing all these dead leaves that we left here in autumn. They helped retain moisture in the soil so we wouldn't have to water as much in the next sowing season. A thick layer of leaves also blocks the light from reaching any weed seeds we don't want growing in here. Last summer, the mint spread across half of this bed, so I'm now pulling out some of the thicker roots. I only want to keep a few, since mint spreads very quickly, faster than any mint lover can consume. The base layer inside both of these raised beds was made of branches and plant matter, which have now broken down and reduced the soil level, so we're adding 2 extra bags of potting mix to bring it back up.
No.
And of course, some help with another inspection. A bit of leveling, and it looks like it's ready for planting. Moving on to the second bed, and it looks like one of the celery plants survived the frost, but we haven't made much use of it last year, so we won't be keeping it. There are quite a few leftover roots from last season left in this frame. We had a few tomato plants, some cabbage, an eggplant, and some marigolds. This year, we're thinking of starting with early crops like lettuce and radishes. They grow quickly, and once they're done, we have space for summer flowers and maybe a few tomato plants. In the corner, there's an ivy we tried to save after it mysteriously came off of the main plant on the other side of the garden. We're not really sure how this happened, and we're still wondering if the dogs had anything to do with that. Most of the ivy plants we've successfully propagated were much smaller. This one was larger, which might be why it didn't root and eventually dried out. Just like with the first bed, we're adding 2 bags of potting mix to bring the soil level back up and prepare it for planting this year's veggies and flowers. There are also a few planters with herbs that need attention. We kept them in a small cabinet-type greenhouse over winter to protect them from the frosts, and now it's time to bring them back outside. There's a lemon balm starting to put out new leaves, an oregano, 2 types of thyme, and a random clump of grass that I'll remove to make room for other stuff. I'm mainly cutting back the dry parts and breaking up the compacted soil. Back in the garden, we've got a new addition, a potted cypress that needs to be planted somewhere. This is how the area looks so far. The last section should be quicker. There are fewer smaller plants here, so it's mostly about working around the larger shrubs. But before we move on to the third and final section of mulching, we need to plant the cypress. It's going in this corner along with the other evergreens. There's a holly and a yew and a creeping juniper that keeps this part of the garden green during winter. Out of the pot and into the ground. And that's it. It can start settling in and grow as freely as it pleases. We're watering the area to help everything settle, both the cardboard and the surrounding plants. Wet soil helps the cardboard break down and allows water to pass through to the roots. We're down to the last few pieces of cardboard, and it might not be quite enough, but we'll cover as much as we can. There's not much left to do now, and we're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel with this garden project. The cover on the Japanese maple can come off for now while we work around it, but it still needs protection overnight as we don't want to risk losing any more of its branches. A larger cutout around the tree base lets the soil breathe and handle moisture properly. That's all the cardboard used, plus a few extra pieces for the edges. And now everything gets a final watering before adding the last layer of pine bark mulch. And the maple goes back under its veil for another few weeks. Thank you for hanging around with us for the first part of the garden spring cleanup. If you've tried mulching before, please share any tips and tricks you found helpful. This is a first for us, so we're still figuring things out as we go. Hope you enjoyed it as much as we did, and we'll see you around with new updates as the season progresses.